Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at how you can improve your supply chain sustainability and procurement process through the use of GEMI's new free online tool. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the supply chain and waste management channels here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. Joining us we have Steve Hellam, GEMI's Executive Director, and Bill Gill, GEMI Membership Chair and Supply Chain Sustainability Chair, and also Assistant Vice President of Environmental Affairs at Smithfield Foods. We're also very fortunate to be joined by Chris Erickson, CEO of Climate Earth, and Tim Smith, Director of North Star Initiative for Sustainable Enterprise at the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. Today's presentations will last around 30 minutes, which will leave us with a good 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So just type in your question and press send, and then we'll wait till the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the presentations, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Steve, who will get us started with today's webinar. So Steve, over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all the folks that are on the call today. Very much appreciate you taking the time to do this. First of all, I would like very much to thank 2 Degrees for their hosting of this call. Stephen and the 2 Degrees team they're extraordinarily folks to work with, and the 2 Degrees program is if you're not engaged with the 2 Degrees program, you should learn more about what they do. There are 44,000 professionals that utilize the 2 Degree process, and we're very fortunate to be able to work with them today to discuss this new GEMI tool. On the phone with me also from the GEMI organization is Kellen Mahoney, who's the program manager. And if you have questions after the webinar, please contact us through the website. We're really pleased to have all of you on the call today. Stephen has already been kind enough to introduce the actual participants on the call today. I just would like to share, Steve, if you would go to the next slide. And this slide will give you an overview of basically what Chris was just discussing. But then if you would, Stephen, go on to the next one. Just to let everyone know that GEMI and all of our activities are governed under GEMI's Antitrust Guidelines. These are an intimate part of every meeting that we have, every discussion we have. We want to ensure that we're always sticking to an agenda and make sure that we're always discussing the things that are most appropriate in the context of not only the agenda but also the general discussion. If there's any issue during this webinar, with regard to issues that are discussed, etc., please don't hesitate to call them to our attention. We will address them immediately. We always also recommend that if you're taking notes on the call, that you please include the fact that we discuss these antitrust guidelines in your notes. With that, I'm going to move directly to Bill Gill. Bill is GEMI's chair. In addition to his other duties, he is also the co-chair of this new sustainability tool, and as Stephen said, he is the Assistant Vice President of Environmental Affairs at Smithfield Foods and has done a tremendous job in terms of leading our organization and the team to develop what we think is a pretty darn unique tool. Bill, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. All right. Real quickly, I'll go over today's agenda. We'll talk first a little bit about what is GEMI, which GEMI is an acronym for the Global Environmental Management Initiative. We'll then talk about the tool itself, a supply chain sustainability tool, how it was developed, how it functions, how it works, and be able to provide an actual demo or walkthrough of the tool itself to hopefully impress you with the capabilities and simplicity of the tool. And then, of course, at the end, we'll follow up with questions. So what I'd like to do is kind of introduce the participants to GEMI in case you're not familiar with our organization. You can see our vision and mission statements here. So what we are is consortium, I guess, of various industries, manufacturers, companies that come together. We look at kind of current and future trends in terms of environment and sustainability. We meet together, discuss those trends, how we're impacted, and then collaboratively essentially create solutions. In this case, a supply chain tool. In other cases, quick guides or white papers, other sorts of solution packages that our members and others with an interest then can use. So you can see from the mission statement, we're very collaborative. We try to be a leader, and that we try to be a very forward-looking organization. We're not an advocacy or lobbying group. We're a solutions group, and we try to lead in that respect. We try to be a very transparent organization and communicate our activities. We use networks and networking, various subcommittees of GEMI, and regular meetings, in-person meetings, to allow for effective collaboration, and also outside speakers, individuals who bring additional expertise and information to our efforts. And then, of course, as I mentioned, in the end, we want to create solutions that can be utilized to address the issues that we see that are effective and useful to industry, and match with business strategies, as well as sustainability and environmental efforts. So real quick on value and benefits, we do have these meetings. We feel like as a collaborative group that in-person meetings are very important and very much facilitate what we try to do as a group. Conference calls and webinars have value and can be very effective, but as we develop our solutions and examine trends and issues, challenges, we find that our regular meetings, our in-person meetings, are very helpful to that. We're very much a consensus-based group. We pursue what the group is interested in. So even though we're diverse industries and companies, we share a lot of common issues, and so we try to focus on those and again, create solutions. We do have the facility to benchmark across our companies, develop surveys. So if a member company has a question, how are you addressing this issue? Where are you on this? Then that information can be easily shared. And we do have a members-only section that carries more detailed information on what transpires during our meetings and our networking and sort of forward-looking plans and other things that are useful to the members as they participate in the GEMI organization. If we could go to the next slide, Stephen. I mentioned several times, of course, that we produce solutions, and part of that is an online solution tools matrix that we have. You can see since the inception of GEMI back in the early 90s, we've developed over 24 tools for companies and industries to use, all available free to anyone who wants to log onto our site and have a look. Along with this tools matrix, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can see kind of an orange box. You can use a search process. We call it guided discovery. And so using keywords, you can window down on the particular tool that might address the issue, the challenge that you have as a company. So you can start with water, then go to water conservation or watershed, and drill down on a particular water-related tool that would be of interest to you. So you don't have to search through and read and look at every single tool to figure out which one is right for you. This guided discovery will steer you directly to those tools. And we have tools that run the gamut really in terms of water, energy, waste, sustainable development, outreach and communication, a whole series of tools that allow our companies to build a program in sort of a documented and orderly kind of way. So on to the next slide. Like I said, again, we're very collaborative. Sometimes when we develop a significant tool, much as the one that we're going to look at today, not only does our membership participate, but we also allow companies with an interest outside to participate in that single tool. not as a full member, but as a project participant. And so you can see the broad range of companies that were involved in this particular supply chain tool. And so it has evolved and developed with a lot of input from a lot of different companies, so that it is an effective and very usable tool. We include, of course, from these companies, their sustainability experts, as well as for a tool like this, people involved in supply chain and procurement, and also other expertise, much like Tim Smith and Chris Erickson, who you'll meet here shortly, to make sure that we develop a functional, capable, fully informed tool for our members and others to use to address the challenges. Okay, on to the next slide. Of course, a little bit about the specific tool here. The SES is Supply Chain Sustainability Tool, and as member companies, we obviously realize the trend toward supply chain and those type activities, and so we also struggle with surveying suppliers for a variety of information: greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, water consumption, et cetera, how to collect that information, compile that information, and then, of course, use it in some kind of beneficial way. However, we approached this and said there's a lot of information already out there about different products, life cycle analyses, a lot of information on environmental impacts of different products. Can't we use that existing information to develop a tool, a way to then in turn work with our suppliers on managing those environmental impacts and hopefully and typically in win-win sort of situations. So what we've done is we've kind of said we're not going to spend all our time collecting information and figuring out what to do with it. Our intent more is to utilize existing information and move forward more quickly. The idea, too, of course, is to involve specific product categories so the information is specific to those categories, and of course, be able to do so in a way that is easy, comprehensive, has the functionality we need, but at the same time is easy and simple to use and can involve procurement and other operations that might not necessarily be mainstream in terms of our sustainability efforts. So we feel like this tool has met our strategic objectives and that we can now work with our supply chain to develop programs to assess environmental performance and address it through the supply chain. Of course, it's like anything, this is a work in progress. All our GEMI tools are, so we need more use, more evaluation, more feedback to make it more effective. I'll mention here at the onset, we chose 3 product categories to work on initially: paperboard container manufacturing, essentially cardboard packaging; plastic film and sheet manufacturing, once again, a packaging material that's in common use across many companies and industries; and then soap and cleaning compound manufacturing, which relates more to commercial and industrial cleaners and sanitizers, once again, that are commonly used across many industries. So our hope is that this tool is a good start, a foundation we can build from, and that we can use this tool to expand to different types of product categories for different industries, continue to get feedback to make the software work better, to be more effective, and to allow a full and adequate assessment of supply chain in terms of not only greenhouse gas emissions and water consumption, but opportunities to improve on that, and as well what the dollar impact is across not only the initial product categories, but entire portfolio of procurement for an individual company. So with that introduction, I think we'll move on to more detail on the tool and background, and for that, I'd like to turn it over to Tim Smith.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to go fairly quickly over some of this material, mostly so that we can get to Chris Erickson and walk through the tool itself. But it is important, I think, to recognize where we were when we started the development of the tool and what some of those impacts and some of those trends looked like leading up to its development. But the images shown on this slide are actually created out of some work that Sangwon Soo has done it in Santa Barbara and illustrated through some work that Jason Pearson and his economy map software has developed. But it basically shows across the entire U.S. economy that a large portion of the consumptive impacts, the impacts associated with what we buy and what we use, are tied up in these complex supply chains. And that's becoming recognized by many organizations, both companies and NGOs and governments alike, in terms of trying to find ways of reaching back up into the supply chain to identify, prioritize, and assess impacts within that part of business. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is showing up in reporting programs. These are just two. GRI and CDP have all included scope 3 types of impacts, which would be those kinds of impacts that aren't either your direct operations or your procured utilities primarily. But there are many other organizations, rating organizations, as well as individual industry-level initiatives that are all beginning to focus much more on these issues of materiality, what really matters in terms of your organization and its impact across its supply chain, as well as looking at expanding the boundaries beyond your owned operations into operations across the value chain at large. Could you go ahead and move to the next one, please? It's really not just reporting impacts, though. We're also seeing where reputational kinds of benefits from and risks associated with organizations' activities also extending into operational pressures as well. So whether it be coming in the form of catastrophes or whether it comes from in the form of supply disruptions, we're seeing more and more multinationals identifying supply chain as being important to their management scope. Therefore, being able to have greater transparency, greater visibility into supply chain, as well as being able to have tools of assessing what kinds of strategies might be most effective become increasingly important. And this tool is attempting to take a step toward that direction of being able to provide easy and accessible means of managing these issues. Next slide, please. So the issue is there's a lot of work that's being done looking at reporting and how we might transition from reporting to sort of active management. And while there's a lot of work that's being done in terms of hotspotting, this image is simply some work that TrueCost put together, and very good work that TrueCost put together in terms of identifying priorities and where to look within supply chains and where impacts might reside. The hotspotting approaches and these kinds of efforts to identify where to look don't necessarily help identify what to do once you find them, or how you might assess strategies within those hotspots. And those strategies have all sorts of technical and budget and market constraints that might influence what you do once you identify that manufacturing, as it shows in this picture, might be an important contributor to greenhouse gas emissions for this particular company. Again, we're trying to find ways to look deeper into and within those hotspots, and that's one of the things this tool is doing. Next slide, please. So the tool itself is really trying to provide a simple, scalable tool that procurement managers, supply chain managers can use to guide priorities across their portfolio, as well as measure performance of different sourcing strategies that could be implemented within their organization. So in terms of actual functionality, we're looking at CO2 and water use hotspots that are identified within a particular procurement and sourcing portfolio of the user focused on the tool. Again, very simple. The inputs required are simply spend types of inputs, of how much we spend in different sectors, to be able to provide this sort of hotspot map or some sort of an indication then of where within the portfolio input identified, you would be able to identify the magnitude of impact associated with CO2 and water use. The next thing that it does is it helps to quantify hotspot reduction alternatives. So how could we look at those identified hotspots, those identified areas of impact within our supply chain, and how might we be able to assess different changes, different approaches. We're looking at these in terms of scenarios. How might we be able to procure different kinds of inputs that have different attributes, different performance characteristics associated with them in terms of CO2 and water use, and how can we assess their contribution to improvement vis-a-vis other alternatives. And finally, the tool will allow you to not only look at the environmental impacts, but also what the economic ramifications might be. If I want to buy more recycled content in a particular packaging option, then I might have to pay more for it. So the tool allows you to also begin to put economic information into that. And what I'd like to acknowledge Tom Lyon at University of Michigan, who's been working with us on this particular part of the tool, particularly in terms of future functionality that we envision with the tool in terms of being able to look across this multitude of options and begin to build some optimization functionality into the tool. And this is very much a goal of our group should evaluation and use of the tool dictate. Next slide, please. So in terms of major contributions, what we see this as doing and providing for the tools, that it's an open platform tool. Anyone can use it. It is free of charge. It's very consistent with the other GEMI approaches to tool development. And particularly it looks at this procurement basket. So it is based on existing environmentally extended input-output models. And to that then we link a fairly unique approach in terms of attaching process-based LCA approaches that are targeting towards the hotspots associated with the supply chain hotspot indicators in order to be able to look directly into the basket items themselves. We also feel like it provides a significant amount of flexibility in terms of being able to look at both individual strategies. If I want to try to identify what is the best what's the best scenario in terms of purchasing strategies within paper packaging, I can look at that. I can also look at how does an improvement opportunity in paper packaging compare to improvement in plastic packaging or into industrial cleaners. And so I'm able to look across the procurement basket. It also, especially with something like packaging, might be able to identify that if I implement a certain carbon reduction strategy in my paper packaging, and that may also have a benefit to the packaging's ability to protect the contents inside it, I may also be able to reduce spoilage and actually reduce my spend in other procured categories. This has been a sort of interesting finding and interesting potential use that we've identified through some of our discussions with the GEMI community, and I think there's some real opportunity that those types of decisions could be explored. Next slide, please. I certainly don't want to go through all the modeling and all the activities that are important with this. What I do want to be able to just show is that the different attributes and the different that form the scenarios that can be explored through this tool are in many ways additive. So some are path dependent, meaning that you can't have both 35% recycled content and 75% recycled content. But across the supply chain, there are different improvement opportunities that might be available at different stages of the supply chain. So in terms of paper manufacturing, there could be energy efficiency opportunities or energy substitution opportunities that become important. In the conversion, the packaging conversion stage, there may be opportunities. Certainly in terms of transport and use, there could be opportunities as well. So if we look at paper packaging, you can begin to see sort of in this picture, though it may be hard to read, we've simply just identified some of the best scenarios in terms of reduction and how you can get really quite large reduction opportunities if you were to spend a ton of money to get at each one of these. We can also see sort of mid-range and worst-case scenarios as well in terms of different options that may have different spend profiles associated with them. So in any case, energy management is still a big hitter in paper packaging, which would be expected. Significant reductions certainly can also be found, though, with regard to recycled content and others. Next slide, please. Similarly, we can see issues with regard to plastic packaging and how resins might be able to play a part in that. And again, these are just the GHG results. There are also water results we can look at this in the same way. The horizontal axis, which is a question that was just posed, is simply a representation of the stages in production. So as we are at the blue boxes, that's in resin manufacturing. As we start moving out, they become different options within different stages of production. For example, film production in that next piece. So it's sort of a unitless axis, just so you know. It's more of a visual representation. So again, resins can matter. Bio-based might depend on what feedstock. Recycled content might depend on what kind of resin that you're operating within. Energy substitution, again, it tends to be a potentially strong strategy within the supply chain in terms of being able to provide GHG. Next slide, please. Just to complete the story, multipurpose cleaners were also looked at. Again, issues of packaging of those cleaning products tend to matter quite a bit in terms of their sort of bulk or volume packaging. Recycled content, energy management still tend to be relatively important avenues for improvements in emission reduction. It is important to notice that oftentimes you might pay a carbon price in order to be able to receive a benefit along another dimension. We didn't explicitly model issues of VOC reductions and potential benefits that could be associated with those. But a case could be made, for example, that a procurement organization might look to a bio-based formulation in terms of being able to reduce VOC emissions, and in order to do that, you may actually see a addition to your carbon profile in order to achieve that. And this tool would at least be able to quantify and be able to assess what costs you might incur in terms of your carbon or water use scenarios in order to meet other objectives. Next slide, please. With that, I will turn it over to Chris to sort of walk through the demonstration of the tool itself, to walk through the functionality and some of the intention. I would like to just begin to highlight as we make the transition, the simplicity of the tool. And I think that's something that Chris and his team worked on tremendously to try to find a way to make this not a increasingly complex tool, even though it's an increasingly complex problem. And with that, kudos to Chris and his team, and I'll hand it to him to continue the rest of the demonstration.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Let's see, I wanted to just start maybe just for a moment on reviewing what we saw on the previous slide, and then I'll go into the demonstration, but it looks like we'll go ahead and share my screen. There we go. So I'm going to be giving you an overview of the tool itself. Essentially, our job was to make the research that Tim's team at the University of Minnesota did, make that research accessible and usable. I'm going to start with, showing a single category management, looking at one category, and that's the notion that we've been talking about, is shifting the discussion away from getting information from your suppliers to using the research here to propose specific strategies. We'll then talk about a cross-category management, so looking at the whole portfolio and getting a little more complex. And that will include a little bit of look at what's possible in the current tool with changing the economics of the purchase portfolio. So you're looking now at the log on screen. And when you first come to the site, you'll see that there's a license. And the first thing, of course, to do, which is typical, is to accept that license. And then it comes to the start screen. So why don't we go right ahead and move into the demonstration. So the application tracks each of the strategy scenarios that you create. So the first thing we want to do is create a name for that strategy. Let's call it version 1. And this can be tracked through for ongoing reporting and looking back. The tool has literally hundreds of categories, but as Tim mentioned, for the initial launch, we focused on 3 where the research has been completed. So we'll start with a portfolio of the plastic materials that Tim was talking about, and we select that and input a purchase amount. We'll go back up and put the paperboard and put the dollar amount of purchase, and excuse me for that. And then we simply go down and hit the submit key. This sends it to the analytic engine, which assesses the portfolio. We have a visualization at the top. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Let's look at the reporting. The first tool gives you a simple summary of the total global warming potential, water consumption, and your total spend. That, in turn, is broken down by each of the purchase categories and the baseline impacts and spend again. And then down below, we have the really powerful and, I think, interesting part of the tool, which is to look at various strategies based on different changes to the normal process of manufacturing. So let's start with a simple single. We'll look at biogas thermal in our plastic packaging. We'll look at recycled PET. I think you can notice that each of the inputs has a simple help button that allows you to indicate what are the researched impacts of each item that I've selected. We can then go down to the bottom. We have version 1. We can submit that analysis, and the tool returns now a visualization. You can see here that our plastics packaging, the 318,000 kilograms of CO2 has been reduced down to 270. We have a visualization of that reduction from the recycled PET. We can drill down into each of the categories, and this is very useful if you have many categories. We can also drill out. We can look at our water impacts across the portfolio, and here we have very nominal water impacts. What we've reduced in this strategy has reduced our greenhouse gas or CO2 equivalent by 9%, nominal increase in water consumption. And you can see the detail at each of the category levels as well. So let's look at a little bit more complicated. I also want to go back and say one of the things when you're working within your organization or with partners is you want to be able to share information and material. As I mentioned, each of the scenarios or strategies is stored up here at the top with a unique number. You can come back and retrieve that. We also have the ability to generate an email, so you can send to whomever you please an email with the link to the scenario. And whoops. Go back here. Let's see, get rid of this. There we go. Excuse me while I fiddle with the sharing tool. We also have the ability, looking at, go back to global warming. We also have the ability to print or save the various scenarios. Here I have it set up as a PDF, and you can see you can then save that to your desktop and distribute the analysis. If we want to make this a little bit more complex, more interesting, we can go down to paperboard and let's add some attribute changes here. Let's start with wind electricity. Maybe we've had a pretty sophisticated supplier. We want to look at a more complex analysis. Perhaps look at unbleached. Go down here. We have lots of options. The team did a lot of research to look at alternative scenarios, which, as Tim pointed out, are cumulative. So we can walk a path. We might want to call this a new, more complex version, so we'll call it version 2. Submit that to the engine. Again, now you can see we have greater reductions down in the paperboard. We can look at water. The interesting thing is some of the impacts here, we can see the paperboard containing the biogas has an added back impact, which is in red. You can drill down into that if need be. And I think can you clarify who provided the data there? So University of Minnesota did this research. It essentially we started with a input-output model, and then the University of Minnesota did research on each category to determine, researching process LCA work on what the typical reductions would be, and that research project was then incorporated into the models database so that we can display them on the screen. Last of all, I'd like to also just show that when we're down, we might be able to, because we're using recycled PET, perhaps we're fortunate enough to get a price reduction. The complexity here in the paperboard might mean that we're going to have to pay a little bit more. So we might want to call that version 3, where we've had some conversation with suppliers and we can submit that final analysis. And sorry about that. And we can see now that our full portfolio has a 16% reduction in greenhouse gas, 16% reduction in water. Our spend is about the same, it's gone up slightly. That may be negotiable, but we now see that the total portfolio view incorporates both the global warming, the water, and the economic implications. Last of all, I should point out that in the About section, one thing we get a lot of questions about is the level of documentation and the source of where the changes came from and how the research was done. There's white papers available from the University of Minnesota that you can quickly access if somebody asks questions about how or where the impacts had occurred. So with that, I'm going to turn back to the slides, and if we can flip one more slide forward. Have I stopped? There we go. I'd just like to point out that the portfolio strategy scenario is probably, at this stage, ideally suited to work in collaboration with more sophisticated, broad-based analysis of your supply chain, including supplier, perhaps a tier-wise analysis, and even a country analysis, so that you get a full perspective of what's possible. And with that, I'll turn it back to Bill, who will wrap up for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. All right, we wrap up here quickly so we have some time for questions. But I think hopefully you have seen the concept of the tool here. Basically allows sort of procurement, your procurement group to add a tool to their toolbox that involves sustainability or environment, basically from a greenhouse gas and water perspective. So the tool itself does not tell you what product to buy. It simply says here are the environmental impacts of the product, essentially as you're procuring it, and then what if we were to look at alternative production scenarios? What if a supplier used biogas or electrical conservation or increased recycled content? What sort of impact would that have? And of course, not only on greenhouse gas emissions and water consumption, but also it's tracking the cost for you. Now, you have to put in the cost from your specific suppliers, but when you say, hey, I want to go to more recycled content because we have a goal at our company to reduce supply chain greenhouse gas emissions by 10%, this is the tool that you can go to that will quantify for you the results you're achieving and essentially at what cost to receive those. So the tool, as you can see, is really very simple to operate. There's a huge amount of data behind it. Tim and his group looked at a variety of life cycle analyses and information that reflect the different production or manufacturing scenarios associated with those three product categories, and we're able to help you very quickly and very easily understand what the impact is of having your supply chain utilize those to manufacture that particular product. We'd love to have more and more of you look at the tool. You'll see there's a link here on the next slide. We can do that. And interest in additional sectors, we'll certainly be glad to bring our team back together and work with folks on that to add various sectors as part of our sort of GEMI solutions process. So with that, I think if we could, we'll kind of close out here and flip to the last slide, which there's the link for the tool. Anybody can use that right now. The tool is there. It's available. You can see some contact info if you have questions about particulars related to the tool. I think for GEMI, we feel like that we've taken what can be a very confusing and complicated sort of calculation effort and really narrowed it down so that now you have the opportunity to work with your suppliers in a more or less quantified way on what their different processes can bring to you in terms of environmental performance and particularly in terms of reductions and what the cost is associated with that. So I think with that, what I'll do is turn it back over to Stephen and Steve and see if there's any questions for the participants today.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill and Tim and Chris, very much for the overview. I will share with you just to tag on, Bill, what you just shared in the context of the link to the tool. There is a video available that's on the tool on the link that basically walks you through very much what Chris just talked us through. Kind of the first question. This, and I believe this is probably for you, Bill, but see how you want to handle this. This is clearly an interesting tool from multiple perspectives, but it is a business tool. So how does a person engage the business people and procurement team on this type of approach? You want to give that a shot, Bill?
All right. Well, obvious answer is kind of it depends, and primarily on how your company functions in terms of sustainability and procurement. If your procurement folks are operating under some specific environmental performance criteria, like I mentioned, a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the supply chain, then here's something you can take directly to them and say, this will do that for you. It like I said, it doesn't decide what to buy. There's obviously other considerations, cost, delivery, criteria that you need for your product. How does this product or material work as it goes through the rest of the supply chain or life cycle? And so I think in many cases, this may be a way that you can connect with some of the other business operations, with procurement and even sales and marketing, in terms of, look, I've got a tool here that's very useful to us. It focuses on sustainability, environmental performance, and we can use this tool as part of our procurement process to determine how we can impact greenhouse gas emissions, water consumption, and then, of course, use that information to let our customers know that we're pursuing this and we're addressing it. So I know for many companies, sustainability folks, we sit in the far back there and get little or no attention sometimes. But at the same time, this is a very good opportunity if your procurement people are not already effectively involved in sustainability and environmental performance criteria as part of their purchasing, then you can connect with them through this tool. You saw the demo. I mean, that's how easy it is to use. You plug in your numbers, and it does the rest of the work. So I think for me here at Smithfield Foods, and hopefully for many of you, this is an excellent opportunity to engage some of the folks that you're not normally engaged with and say, look, I've got something that can be useful to both of us, and expose them to it, work with it, very simple to use, free, no license fees, no complicated processes to go through. Click on the link and let's use the tool. So I think that it will very readily and very easily allow sort of cross-functional engagement across your company because of the way the tool is constructed and the capabilities that it has.
That's great, Bill. Thank you. Here's one I think is probably for Tim. How are the environmental improvement estimates for each scenario determined? And then a sidebar question to that is, are these factors and information just for the USA?
Good question. The impact assessment that was done is based on a methodology that we've been developing over the last few years. We published some of that methodology in the Journal of Industrial Ecology just recently. It is a truncated or a streamlined LCA process, so it's not a full-blown LCA, which does help with speed of being able to sort of rapidly conduct research in individual sectors and be able to put those out. It's not nearly as costly or as time-consuming as a full-blown LCA. It is based on U.S.-based data. These are U.S.-based factors, both in terms of the input-output models as well as the LCA characterization models and the process-based approach. That being said, I mean that's all the sort of technical geek stuff. I think the main point of this is that it does require some research. It does require some effort to quantify individual sectors and create those individual sectors in a consistent way across a portfolio. However, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel with this. We do need to create more sectors if we want to be able to fully assess different opportunities, but it's a scaled process. I think we can focus on sectors as they become important and as strategic options are available. I think we can develop more complex scenarios as supply chains and individual users in supply chains require more complex scenarios, where there are options that we don't have information on, where there's a supplier who's got a particular solution or a group of suppliers that has sort of a suite of solutions that could be or should be assessed with this. So we don't need to do everything all at once. I think that's the key to a tool like this, is that it is scalable, it can evolve over time, and I think that's that's the key benefit that GEMI's brought to the table through this tool.
Thanks, Tim. Here's one. Can the tool make suggestions for me as to the best way to cut my emissions for a given budget?
I guess I'll take that as well, Steve. It doesn't today. We are working on some methods. We've been working with Tom Lyon, who posed that question, because I think he'd like to see that functionality, and I very much agree. We are working on ways of being able to take all of these drop-down menus and be able to assimilate them into a single analysis where if I wanted to keep my budget fixed, but find ways across my portfolio of shifting spend in a way that would reduce emissions, would minimize my emissions. We are working on methods to be able to do that. It's not that hard to do the analysis. It's hard to get the software to incorporate it easily, at least not within the scope that we had at this first pass. So I fully believe that those are critical ways of simplifying the approach. Right now, the tool operates more as a what-if analysis. So what if I were able to get this attribute at this particular shift in spend? What might the results be? Being able to create some optimization functionality around that is definitely on our radar screen. I really hope we have the opportunity to add that to the tool as we move forward.
Thanks, Tim. Here's one that GEMI has been grappling with across a number of approaches in the context of the fact that we have so many tools, but in the context of the technology that's available these days, it's a question that says, first of all, well, thanks for the compliment on the tool, but then the rest of the question was, can it communicate with phone apps and smart meters for ease of use?
Maybe that's a question for me. This is Chris.
Hey, Chris.
The question about smart meters is really, there's one answer to that is no, but the other is the tool is designed for supply chain analysis, and smart meters generally are, if we're obviously for in-house, are your scope 2. But if you're talking to suppliers about real-time analysis, I think that's a great idea to be able to collect supplier data electronically and store it in the tool database. Right now, the tool is set up as a free tool that anyone can use, so that would probably also require some modification so that there is a manufacturer-specific version of each of the tools, so that the data from their suppliers can be stored online.
That's great. One of the questions here is it's a question I think everybody's having to deal with in the context of supply chains. Policymakers and shapers in many countries all note that whilst it is easy to get Tier 1s involved, most efforts to get Tier 2s and 3s has failed to date. Do you see this tool as being able to overcome the barrier to get small and medium-sized enterprises more involved?
This is Bill. You want me to take that, Steve?
Yeah, Bill. That'd be great.
Tim and Chris can add. I think the simplicity of the tool and the fact that the data comes from within the tool makes it very easy to engage others, your entire supply chain, into the process. The various manufacturing attributes that you can impact or assess through the tool stem all the way down to all through hotspots anyway, the critical points through the entire life cycle of the product. So that allows you to go to Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers. And for instance, for paperboard, there's attributes in there associated with the foresting of the original pulpwood that goes along to eventually become the cardboard that you use for your packaging or your containers. So I think that it very much engages you with the entire supply chain, so you have the opportunity to reach all the way down or up, however you like to look at it, through that supply chain to see what impact can be had at various levels, so that you can engage suppliers. You know, you may have done real well with the first tier because you're in direct communication with them, you're purchasing directly from them, but you can work through them or with or around them to reach further into the supply chain and deal with tiers all the way down to kind of the origin of the original raw material for the product categories that are included.
Thanks, Bill. Chris, did you want to add something?
Maybe at a more general level, I think the question hits on the key point of sustainable supply chain management, which is there's really two challenges. One is visibility, and the other is influence. The tool provides great visibility, as Bill pointed out, but it also shifts the conversation from what we have called, asking for what's your scope 1 and 2 impacts to, we have some research available that shows, this strategy would accomplish this kind of reduction. And so you now have shifted the conversation and hopefully can engage the suppliers at a different level about looking at feasibility of options rather than requesting data.
Thanks, Chris. Here's a question that GEMI always grapples with in the context of making sure that GEMI's doing work that, for the most part, other people aren't doing. It's a second part of a question, and we've discussed the first part of the question, but this question is there similar LCA software like this? And then there were some suggestions in the context of other software. I guess the bottom line question is, how unique is this tool? Tim, Chris?
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. And then
go ahead,
Tim
Tim.
Can join in if that's okay.
Yeah, please, Tim.
There certainly are tools that do sort of the first objective of the GEMI tools that we've outlined today. The Carnegie Mellon tool, work that Sungwon Soo has done as well. There's there are approaches that can be used through those. That sort of prioritization of looking through the hybrid LCA models, ones that incorporate both these economic flows as well as process flows in the work. Those models exist. The interface, especially if you want to look at the Carnegie Mellon tool, can replicate the same things that we've done. In fact, we use the Carnegie Mellon tool as the engine behind the I/O approach in this tool. And that's through work and relationships that Climate Earth has with EMU. But once you start getting into this sort of parameterization, right? So what happens if we change the processes associated with the overall industry level of activity associated with the way in which paper packaging is produced, the different industry flows that go into that? What if we were going to shift the way in which that industry might be constructed, right, to have different kinds of attributes associated with the product that I buy? I'm not buying a generic paperboard package. I'm buying one that has more recycled content. Being able to link those two approaches and be able to look at those kinds of shifts within the particular category and then compare them across different spend categories is something unique to this tool and something that hasn't been made easily accessible before, and that was really the uniqueness of the tool, and that's what I think the leadership position that GEMI has taken in terms of trying to further that, I think, is a very, very strong.
Thanks, Tim. We've got time just for about one more question. I think this is probably directed at you, Bill. Do you have indications or sense that procurement professionals will actually use the tool?
Well, I think certainly hope so, but I think so. As part of the GEMI organization, the member companies included their procurement groups as part of the tool development, So there was input from procurement. We didn't create it in a vacuum. As I mentioned, I think the initial question, I think, it depends on the relationship between sustainability and environment in your company and procurement. I think once demonstrated, the tool is very simple. The answers are quick and easy to understand, I think, really. So I think that in some cases you may have to help your procurement people understand the beauty of the tool, the function, the things it can do for them, and how it can be an important part of their overall procurement toolbox. But like I said, we've included procurement expertise from member companies in terms of development of the tool, so that we didn't create something that immediately gets turned back on us and says, well, this won't work or it doesn't do anything for us. So you may have to tease them in a little bit, but I think that it has a lot of value for procurement and allows them to also participate in sustainability and environmental performance as part of their overall procurement effort.
Great, thanks. Listen, on behalf of GEMI and all the folks that were doing the talking this morning, I want to thank all of you participants, as well as Stephen and the leadership from 2 Degrees for doing this morning. Stephen, I'm going to turn it back to you, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. I'd just like to add my thanks to Bill, Tim, Chris, and Steve for their time today and for getting through so many questions, and for also to everyone who joined us. Just to remind you all, a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform, and once these are posted, I'll send out an email to everybody with a link back to these. So thanks once again for joining us today. I hope you found it useful and that you'll be able to join us for webinars in the coming months. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.